Good evening and welcome to the talk on building resilience and helping cope with change for children and young people. I'm Jo Brett from Starjumpz Children's Centre, and I'm thrilled to be able to welcome Sarah Weller, who is a family relationship and positive parenting specialist who works with Starjumpz. Sarah's going to now introduce the talk that she's going to give, and she's going to talk for about an hour, and then there'll be time for some questions at the end. So please post your questions in the chat so we can answer your questions at the end of her presentation. So Sarah.
Hi there.
Hi
there, everybody. Sorry you can't see me, but if you see me, you can't see the PowerPoint. So I think it's far better.
Sorry, they can see you. I don't know that they can see a little mini version of us.
Oh, okay. I can't see anybody and I can't see you. Anyway, welcome everybody. Thanks for turning up tonight. And I'm going to present to you Minding the Gap and Building Bridges. The reason I've chosen to call it this is because children's brains are not fully integrated and they don't have yet the emotional regulation skills to be able to cope with adversity, uncertainty, and unprecedented change that we've experienced this year. So the purpose of this webinar is that I want to help build bridges by building skills. And one of the key skills I want to talk about is resilience, because resilience is not a naturally acquired skill. It's something that we have to role model and teach. And I guess I know myself, I've had lots of wobbles during lockdown, personally, and with my own children and their situations. And I'm sure we've all had that feeling of we've just having sort of more surviving and getting through it. And you might be all feeling really, really exhausted and maybe overwhelmed. And I just wanted to do this presentation to help you become more fully resourced for the next sort of stage, I guess, coming out of lockdown and helping everybody go into this new phase, everyone's calling it the new normal, with more confidence and ease. And positivity too, especially if we're feeling quite exhausted by it all. So I want to show you how to build resilience in children so that they can cope with adversity and almost sort of normalize that this might be the new normal. You know, if we have a second wave, we could possibly go back into similar situations. And the most useful thing I think we can focus on as parents is to concentrate on helping our children being adaptable to change and to be able to meet them in their world with this, enabling them to be able to find their way with confidence rather than experiencing the changes with fear and anxiety. Because I know that I think lockdown and what our children have experienced and all the unprecedented change has been received. It's a bit like Marmite. Some children have hated it. Some people have absolutely loved it. And I've seen with the children I've personally coached that some of the neurodivergent children, for example, children with dyslexia, ADHD, ADD, have really adapted well to homeschooling. You might think otherwise if you've had different experiences. But I've seen the ones who maybe get their sort of self-esteem boosts from school and are quite high functioning at school. They've found that sort of lack of routine and that lack of academic feedback quite difficult. So I'm going to talk to you for about an hour, and then we're going to have questions afterwards. Jo's going to note down the questions if you want to type any along the way. So I'll just quickly whiz through me, just for any, hello if I know you, and a hello if I don't. So just want to say that I'm a mum of four. I'm a mum of four grown-ups now, they're in their 20s. My background is in the homelessness and mental health sector, in the charity sector. And that's where I gained most of my sort of frontline experience of supporting families. My practice is based on NLP, transaction analysis, and attachment theory. But recently I've undergone a lot of extra training in sort of neurodivergence. And I particularly have an interest in autism and especially the PDA spectrum. And the parenting education program that I'm qualified in is called the Circle of Security, which is an attachment-based program. So looking at the context of what's going on at the moment and what was going on through lockdown and what was being reported, there's so many opinions about the effects of the pandemic and lockdown, ranging from psychologists like lots of psychologists are talking about a collective trauma. And that's not to be a scary word. I always sort of think that trauma is to think of trauma as like a wounding. And that can be a wounding of any sort, whether that's connection or anything. And I'm going to sort of talk about the types of wounding that young people may have experienced. So I found this quote from Young Minds, and Emma Thomas, the chief executive, says the corona pandemic is a human tragedy that will continue to alter the lives of everyone in our society. And the results of this survey show just how big an impact this has had and will continue to have on the mental health of young people. But interestingly enough, there's been lots of other research that suggests that anxiety in young people, particularly teenagers, has really come down. So the BBC News article reported that Bristol University have done a study of 1,000 students in the Southwest who've all reported a lowering of anxiety. So I think it depends very much on how young people have internalized this experience. And that is going to be very dependent on their environment and their circumstances, and especially their thinking patterns. So the alternative view for me is to not assume actually that young people have interpreted this situation as wounding. The father of CBT, who's Epictetus, said it's not the things that trouble us, but the opinions we have about those things. And so it's very much about how children have internalized their experiences that we've gone through. And children are so much more resilient than we actually think. Sometimes it can be our own sort of fears and anxieties that we can not consciously project on our children, but they pick up. They're like little sponges, they soak everything up. So I've talked about this sort of Marmite effect, and what sort of is that really? Lockdown could have been, children could have gained huge gains and or losses, and it all depends how they've attributed meaning to that. So I think that it's helpful to consider what those losses and gains have been for your family. School, for example, I've been working with some children who really get their sense of security from their routine at school. And I've seen this with the children on the autism spectrum those families I help. They've really struggled with the lack of routine, and they've also interpreted the sort of rules, I guess, of lockdown very, very literally. So one little boy I was coaching described described lockdown as like living in a cage. And he said, you know, we have to choose. Mum and me have to choose whether we go for a run or we walk the dog. So their family had interpreted the rules very, very literally. And a lot of children, especially teenagers at that critical age, which I'm going to explain in a bit, get very much their sense of connection and self-esteem from their peers. And of course, you know, that's been really compromised. A lot of children get their real sense of self-esteem from their academic sort of achievements, and opposite to that, a lot of children struggle with school. And I've seen children really thrive being at home and doing the homeschooling. Freedom and movement was obviously sort of curtailed, and I'm sure so many children are really delighted to get back to that. And of course, choice was really compromised, wasn't it? We didn't have the choices that we all take for granted. But on the other hand, we had loads and loads of choice because there was much more flexibility in our routine. For some families, and some families there was more rigidity because of working from home. So I just wanted to put it into context that there's been lots of different things at play that some children and families will have interpreted as a gain, and some will interpret it as a loss. So when we go back to the Young Minds quote, what does Emma mean by what is this sort of idea of collective trauma? What is the threat, and how can we notice whether children are part of this sort of collective trauma, in a sense? So I've already mentioned sort of self-worth, self-esteem that's connected with school and academic achievement. I'm thinking particularly of our teenagers at the moment who didn't get the chance to take their exams and get those certificates, you know, all be with each other, and those joyful moments when they got their certificates and their results. Significance, I think, it's around age 4 that children really start developing a sense of being a unique being, and and get their sense of significance from those around them. And I know what it's been like for parents who've been working so hard trying to keep their jobs going and everything, juggling everything. It's been really hard to balance out everybody's needs, everybody's sort of significant needs. Stress, everybody's experienced stress in some way, particularly if we have, particularly with neurodivergent children, of course, who really hate change and really struggle with change. It makes them very anxiety producing and doesn't make them feel safe. So that's increased, I think, families' stress on trying to help them feel safe enough in the new routine, and work really hard to incorporate that new routine that was really unexpected and thrown at everybody. And of course, security. We've all received messages from our government to say that the world wasn't safe. And of course, now schools have opened, the message very much has changed, and we're sending children back to school before adults are going back to work. A lot of adults are going back to work. My husband, I don't think, is going to be going back till January, and a lot of other office workers I know are not going back to January. So I think that's quite significant that children are seeing that they're going out, but we're not. We're still staying at home. So a bit more context. I just wanted to, when I'm talking about building skills and maybe minding the gap of the lack of skills, I'm just going to talk about the context of developmentally. I'm going to split up between primary children and secondary children. And I think it's really crucial to understand what's happening in the brain. Therefore, we can get a bit of context about where we can start building skills. So the survival center of the brain is the section that's fully developed at birth, and that really is the amygdala. That's why babies scream and cry when they need connection, you know, when they're hungry, when they're cold. And this is where I think that a lot of small children have reverted back to, if you've seen some really difficult behaviors, if you've seen meltdowns, if you've seen more tantrums, this is where young children have sort of got trapped again in their lower brain. So the right-hand brain develops first. Right-hand, left-hand brain is a concept by Dan Siegel. The right-hand brain develops through movement, and that's your emotional center. It's creativity center. It's where language starts, and movement and play and creativity. Then at age 3, we get the left-hand brain developing, which is your lateral logical thinking brain. What we sort of call the more higher brain, where the executive functioning skills are coming in, time management, planning, forward thinking, all of those things. So as I said, that left-hand brain develops when we start moving. And I think I was contacted by quite a few parents who were really worried that their children were almost having personality transformations during lockdown, because, and I think what I wanted to reassure them that this was quite normal, because everything they knew or know or associated in their environments had changed. So it was very, very easy for them to slip back into that emotional overwhelm. By age 5 to 6, children should be able to have some form of self-regulation, but I'm talking here about neurotypical. If you have a child that's neurodivergent, possibly they would be maybe not quite fully, the brain wouldn't be fully there yet, but sort of we're talking more about 2 years difference developmentally. And so you could find that there's a difference there. But when we're talking about building skills, if anyone's read Dr. Ross Greene, a really, really great book, particularly specializing in big behaviors, explosive behaviors. He wrote a book called The Explosive Child, which I'd really recommend if you're experiencing big explosions. But he says that it's all about building skills, and that's what this talk's very much based on. It's not assuming that children will naturally get these skills. It's about teaching them the skills, because the brain is plastic, as we know, and the more practice that we teach children, they can get these new neural pathways. So when I talked about the left hand and the right hand brain, on this little diagram here, I very much felt that this was a really good indication of where a lot of children's brains were at during lockdown. So here we are at the survival state, the amygdala. Children very much looking for clues about how am I feeling safe. Right hand brain, the messages were very much, I think, am I loved? And I think that a lot of the time if a child's brain was stuck in not maybe receiving those messages in an assured way, just because of all the changes that were going on, I think it's very, very hard for them to access their higher brain and very difficult to learn new skills. With teenagers, just a little bit of background. I'm not going to read it all, but I just think that their teenagers' losses were very much about maybe privacy with everyone, a lack of privacy with everyone in the home, and their lack of being with their peers. And also very much bearing in mind that at this time of development between 10 and 14, close friends become much more important than family. So your acting out behaviours may have become much more common. And also, of course, between 15 and 17, their independence was very much compromised. So I don't know if anyone, this is familiar to anyone. Did anyone have witnessed any of these feelings and behaviours which were completely probably what was to be expected, unless you have a model child? Because as I said, I think very much quite a few children's brains were trapped in that sort of survival stress state. And I think it's going to be quite interesting whether these feelings are going to still manifest, or whether school will be the panacea that you're looking for, whether going back to school will give them everything that they crave. And in terms of, you know, being with their friends again, having routine, and, you know, having something different, and, you know, so it may be totally different.
I think what you said earlier, Sarah, about a lot of children finding there wasn't the pressure of school, and many children have been happier without those pressures, being learning at home. For those children, it's going to be very hard going back to school and coping.
Yeah, and that's really the sort of focus of those, that sort of group of children that I wanted to focus on tonight. Yes. Because I just want to prepare to help, you know, because I don't want children's behaviour to be looked at as defiant or uncooperative, difficult, challenging, without having a sort of trauma awareness and how absolutely hard this is for them, because we've given them a, you know, that, you know, cherry on the top of the cake, and then, you know, they've got to go back into a learning environment that they found really stressful, really anxiety provoking, maybe particularly with dyslexic children, and will I think find you know, loved homeschooling from my experience.
Sorry, Sarah, can I just pose a question that seems relevant at this point from
yeah,
somebody watching, about the major brain development you mentioned between 11 and 12. Yeah. Is this for neurotypical children? It's, you know, that
yeah, it's neurotypical, but I would say take 2 years off for those things. So if you've got a neurodivergent child, that you add 2 years, so we'd be looking at 13 to 15.
And there's been more sort of behaviour that's typical of somebody who's on the autistic spectrum, pathological demand avoidance and sensory processing difficulties during the lockdown period. And the question is, you know, would you expect this? Could it be hormones? Could it be the age?
No, I would expect this, because anxiety is one of the predominant main symptoms of that brain, that type of brain.
Yes.
I'm going to talk about this a bit more in a later slide, because of the difficulties with children with autism have over recognizing social cues, and there's a difference in the way that they experience their neuroception works. So I'm going to talk about that in a sort of next few slides.
Thank you.
So we've all got I don't know if generally the knowledge about stress and anxiety is sort of traditionally and commonly talked about, the difference between the parasympathetic system and the sympathetic system. So that is when we get trapped, the amygdala fires off, it's messages, we're in danger. And traditional views are that we need to get the nervous system back on track by breathing and align those two systems. But I think when I've been looking at lockdown and neurodivergent children, I think it's more useful to look at the polyvagal theory with this. And the polyvagal theory is a really useful piece of work which has absolutely transformed our view of trauma, and I think is particularly useful regarding looking at the autism spectrum. So I'll just quickly whiz through it. By the way, I forgot to say I'll send these slides out, Jo, if that's okay.
Yes.
Because there's quite a lot of information here. So basically, Stephen Porges goes further than saying that there's a hierarchy of responses from stress and anxiety and trauma, and it's in these three parts, and it's all to do with the vagus nerve. Vagus means wandering, and as you can see from the diagram, this nerve wanders down the whole body and it links in through all of your organs. So from the time we are born, our automatic nervous system is always intuitively scanning our environment for cues of safety and danger. And this scanning is called neuroception. And in the process of this, our vagus nerve that starts at the back of our sort of brain and goes down, and it goes right down through our stomach, is really key in understanding why we experience so many bodily symptoms when we're anxious and stressed. So two of the responses are fight and flight, which we're really, really familiar with, and the emotions associated with fight and flight are anger. So the fight part is anger and defiance, and then we go into the parasympathetic, which is then split into two. And this is where Stephen Porges' work differs from everyone else's, because the parasympathetic system, he splits into the dorsal vagal and the ventral vagal. The dorsal vagal is our our freeze, when we start removing ourselves, when we withdraw, we hide, we self-isolate, we avoid, and at its complete end, it's flop. So we can go into a state of depression and no motivation, refusing to come out of our room, etc., etc. And what Stephen Porges says is, to get out of both of these situations, we have to engage our social engagement network. We have to resume connection. We have to, and we do that traditionally by facial cues, by eye contact and smiling. And of course, this is where on the autistic spectrum, this is interrupted because of the difficulties that our children have in recognizing facial cues, and therefore that side of getting them back can be very, very difficult. So what can happen then is we can get the children on the autistic spectrum can get stuck in defense mode. And so you can see just this ladder is another sort of picture of how you would sort of describe it. We want to get them back into their higher brain. We want to get them back feeling safe and social and engaged. But because there's a lack of chemicals that support the neurotransmitters for emotional regulation and self-control, and all of the research says that in a child on the spectrum, they have poor vagal tone, which means they're going to find it very, very difficult to activate the social engagement side of the vagal system. So therefore, all the research is showing that instead of facial cues, the most important thing is tone of voice. So it's where the auditory system really, really kicks in. So it's tone of voice, which helps children feel safe rather than facial cues. There's lots of other things that we can do as well. Cold water really tones the vagal nerve. And so it increases vagal strength. So cold showers and cold water swimming. Gargling really works. Gargling because it stimulates the back of the throat. Breath work, obviously. Singing and humming. Singing really works. And I know that humming really annoys a lot of people, really, but humming really, really works because, and so does singing, because it produces vibrations in the neck. So all of Stephen Porges' work is it's quite worth looking into, because he or sort of his school of thought is that the dysregulation of the vagus nerve is considered responsible for a lot of mental and physical problems. And he's got a lot of research about the link between the vagus nerve, poor vagal tone, and autism. And of course, because the vagal nerve goes down into the stomach and the gut, dysregulation can also be caused by poor gut flora as well, that doesn't support the neurotransmitters. And this is where I know Starjumpz do an awful lot of work in functional medicine and looking at what nutrition supports a gut which has got poor microbiome, and how you can, through various nutrients and supplements, you can support the neurotransmitters. So the neurotransmitters typically being serotonin, which is joy, dopamine, motivation, and GABA. And it's GABA that is the one that's really key in anxiety. So a lot of children with extreme anxiety are very low in GABA. Do you want to say a bit more about that, Jo?
I would just, there's a question actually I just wanted to bring up. Somebody's asked about, in terms of using tone of voice and the auditory system to help children feel safe, what about those with hearing issues? There are sort of movement and physical things you can do, as well as breathing, like heavy work, giving deep pressure, hugs, those kind of things can also help with vagal tone. I don't know if there's any things that you would like to add to that, Sarah, for those that cannot maybe hear as well.
Yeah, so some yoga poses which you could do with them together are very, very soothing to the vagus nerve, making it into sort of games. So like most yoga poses are based on animals, so you can make it quite playful, and doing really, really deep breath work within doing those things. So trying to make it as playful as you can.
Things that involve weight bearing and pushing and pulling and lifting, heavy work kind of activities, they can help with vagal tone too. Yeah. And also yoga poses use weight bearing postures.
Yeah, they do. They do. So things like down dogs, can't think off the top of my head, but
walking on floors, doing wall push-ups, doing bridges. I'm an occupational therapist, and as occupational therapists, we do a lot of work on calming the nervous system and increasing vagal tone through movement and sensory activities that can be very calming. So there are lots of things that can help.
Great.
Got someone watching from South Australia. That's amazing.
Oh, hello. Lovely. So I've just put these slides in. I'm not going to go through them because I'm aware of the time, but I just wanted to put this in because I think it's really important to notice any changes that may be occurring, and for you to know what's normal and what's not normal, particularly with teenagers, I think, because there's lots of times when teenagers' hormones are so all over the place and their behavior is very dramatic, and there's lots of storms and emotional storms, and that however normal that is, there are things that do indicate that things may be not quite right. So really irritability all the time rather than a bit of the time, and a sort of sustained overreactivity, I think, and obviously with withdrawal, and focusing on the negative. And then I've put in a slide about how to notice signs of trauma which are different to depression and anxiety, and this can be quite difficult to spot, but and to sort of think that is it depression and anxiety, or has it manifested as trauma? And I think the biggest clue is really the bottom part of a lack of curiosity in the world, a real sort of closing down and not being curious, not showing any wonder, and not really wanting to engage.
We've had a question about a child who thinks that anxiety refers to how they feel before a test, but his parent is seeing it manifest in other ways, like avoiding doing certain things or restricting his foods. So there are many ways that anxiety can be experienced. And the question was, how do you explain to a 12-year-old how they might experience anxiety? Sorry to throw that one out.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
And it's one, firstly, about normalizing worry and what is normal worry and what every sort of the human experience of worry is. So worry is we all worry before tests, we all worry before exams, we all worry sometimes if we're going to make new friends, or so it's almost like putting it into concept of a human experience that's normal. but also not dismissing it. So, and sort of validating and empathizing with it. So, and asking children what they think they can, you know, what are their ideas about, you know, what support they need, for example. You know, is there anything that they think that they could want from you? You know, and I think it's breaking it down into really, really small steps, because sometimes, particularly when we're looking at the audio digital brain, which is sort of this end of the ASD spectrum, where the brain is very much like steps, procedures. You know, that their brain almost works a bit like a ladder. Sometimes the anxiety is not the whole thing. Sometimes it's just a step of one of the task that is causing anxiety. But because they're unsure of that step, the whole thing is wanting to be avoided. So going back to the original question, it's that the test is the anxiety is being presented as the test, and maybe that's signaling that I don't feel in control, which is why the control is being manifested in itself, in food choices, for example, which you've just mentioned. And often anxiety is a thing that is about the need for control, and the brain is needing to control. And it's part of my second sort of half of the talk is about how to help children feel that some things they can't control, but you can use a really big thing I use with children actually is the sentence, what if then. So I encourage them to break down the thing they're worried about into all the little parts, each step, and then deal with each step as it comes. And then the worry is the what if, and then you work out the then this is what we do.
Also, what we were talking about earlier, like decreasing vagal tone to make children feel calmer by doing activities through the day that helps with calming. It can make things more manageable throughout the day, and maybe without all the anxiety that lockdowns created, and not having the movement around the school that would create a movement experience that can calm the nervous system. It's trying to put in those little things regularly during the day that can help keep calm and be able to cope with the more difficult things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was thinking about children having, you know, going back to school, and you know they've probably had actually an awful lot of movement in lockdown, and then they're going back to school and having to sit still sometimes in a small classroom, sit on the mat, you know, sit in assembly. And they're really not used to it. I mean, I guess a lot of some children at home have been able to move around while they're learning. You know, they haven't had to sit still.
Yeah.
You know, they've been able to learn in the garden. You know, learn.
Upside down on the sofa, or however they like to.
Sorry.
Upside down on the sofa,
Yeah,
or however it works.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And you know, my thing is, if that's how they learn, well, fantastic.
yes.
So just going back to those main feelings that are associated with the amygdala, how we can help build those skills, which I said, minding the gap of building emotional regulation. The sort of positive parenting main strategies is to build emotional literacy. So by naming the emotion, that helping your child name the emotion that they're feeling, and empathizing and validating emotion rather than, but not condoning the behavior. So there's very much a separation between, I understand that you may be feeling this, but it's not okay that you've, hit your brother or broken the chair or whatever. And with anxiety, I just wanted to say that it can be really helpful to externalize anxiety. And so use the phrase, what is worry telling you, rather than what are you worried about? Because what are you is internalizing. But if we're externalizing it, saying what is worry telling you, often children don't feel that it's so putting them on the spot. It can work wonders sometimes. So here we are, the main part of the talk. I'll try. I've waffled on a bit, but it's just, but I wanted to make the context of why resilience is so important, because a lot of research now is saying that the biggest predictors of children's mental health, regardless of how their brain works, is this ability to bounce back. And it's helping them understand that, we all make mistakes, we all mess up, but we can always, try again, get up, brush ourselves down and bounce back. And that, bad things happen, bad luck happens, things don't go our way, and that's normal and that's okay. So resilience, as I said, is something that is very much firmly a skill that has to be taught. It's not naturally acquired. And the main researcher on resilience, if you wanted to look her up, is Anne Maston. She works out from Massachusetts University. And all her research has mainly been stemmed from looking at children who've experienced adverse child experiences and how and why they've gone on to have successful lives compared to others who haven't. And she says that the resilience of a child is distributed. And what she means by that is that there's many systems in play. It's not just down to us as parents to help build resilience in our children. And she goes on to say very much what Epictetus said, that quote I said in the beginning, is that what protects our children is those systems. It's not the danger, it's not the adversity, it's that the systems are not working for you or not available. Which is why helping children be with emotional literacy is so key, to validate and empathize and help them build the words for how they're feeling, how to map those feelings in their bodies so that they can understand that when they get those tummy aches, that is the vagus nerve sending out messages that there's something that's not quite right for them, or they're not feeling safe. And it's really about capable and attuned parenting. And the biggest part of being attuned is responding to children's emotions, is responding to children's needs and noticing what's going on. And that's been so flipping hard, hasn't it, for us all, when we're juggling so many balls during lockdown of keeping our jobs going, keeping our, homes going, keeping us resourced, keeping our partners resourced, keeping our children happy and entertained and motivated. That has just been so hard. But resilience, as I said, is helping children understand that bad times don't last and they can bounce back. And we can really start helping them accepting that what they can control and what they can't. So we can talk to them about what they think they can control. That's, their thoughts, their behaviors, their words, their their bodies, you know, all of those sorts of things that they can control. But they can only control them if they understand what's going on. I found this acronym actually on an NHS website. I really like it. So it's all about the sort of what it really encapsulates what resilience is. So my recipe for resilience is building a securely attached relationship, which is one that's really emotionally attuned, where we our children feel unconditionally loved. And as I said, this is really at the heart of the parenting approach that I advocate. And I was talking to Joe about doing a workshop about this in October, because we can't grow resilience if we don't feel safe or if we feel conditionally loved. So I've talked a lot about building executive functioning and self-control, which is building skills, meeting children where they're at, not trying to make children who are neurodivergent into children who are neurotypical, because that puts them under far too much stress. Starjumpz have lots of different programs to help. And as I said, I can really help with the sort of positive parenting side, strategies to use to help children, to encourage children to be able to problem solve and make their own choices and bounce back. I mentioned using empathy and active listening to validate and acknowledge how children are feeling, and helping them build those words, that language for how they're feeling. Using a growth mindset approach, so it's praising children for effort rather than achievement. And this is where you can make such a difference if you have somebody who's got ADHD, because often with ADHD, children cannot fulfill the whole task that they're being asked to do. And I see a lot, particularly in some schools, not all schools, but some schools, some teachers, not praising children for doing the smallest part of that task. That's what they're able to do. So praise them for the tiny bit of task that they've done, even though they haven't achieved the whole task.
Sarah,
because,
sorry. Can I just ask you, you said on a talk you gave a while ago, something about the amount of positive praise you need to give as opposed to any feedback that could be construed as critical.
5-1.
5 to 1. So 5
to 1.
Yeah. Positive.
Yeah. And sometimes we have to dig deep over that. Really dig deep. And that's what I'm meaning by praising the bit of the task they've done, or the bit of the situation they have managed, because the whole task may be too difficult. So eventually, if efforts are not praised, they'll end up giving up. And of course, if you praise the first little bit, that's your first step that they've been able to achieve, and you can really build on from that. So growth mindset is really very much about, as I said, praising for effort, praising for behavior linked with values. So when children are kind, when children share, where they're thoughtful, you know, all those lovely values that you want to encourage. And I just quickly mention using specific connection building language. I'm just going to quickly whiz through the love languages, because this is really a very quick win you can do at the moment to build connection, particularly as children are going into this new phase and experiencing their environment very differently again. So you can look it up. It's Gary Chapman's work. Gary Chapman has got a website called lovelanguages.com. He's written a book called The 5 Love Languages, which is a global book. It's been published in, I think, every single language. And it's a way of really bespokely applying how children feel and experience love. And because often we experience and communicate love in the way that we feel comfortable with. So, for example, if we're very touchy-feely, we may, always want to, cuddle and kiss our children, but that may not be their love language. They may prefer to have lots of words of affirmation. They may prefer to have lots of praise. So you can look it up, but the 5 love languages are gifts, words of affirmation, acts of service, physical touch, and quality time. Now, quality time should be there anyway, but some children, will thrive on being given a lot more. So I've talked about phrases that help curb anxiety. So what I mean by that is externalize it. What is worry telling you? And helping them trying to find the good thing in the day. If you can, stretch it to 3 good things every day really starts rewiring that brain from a negative perspective to a positive perspective.
That's really powerful, I have to say. That simple thing, it's a very simple sounding thing, isn't it, Sarah? But it makes a massive difference, and it does rewire the brain.
Yeah, and consistently practiced for 21 days builds new neurons and new neural pathways. So a lot of people, you read so much about gratitude, and a lot of people feedback to me that, oh, isn't it sort of a bit woo-hoo-y stuff? But it's not. It's actual science. Gratitude is a science. So we talked about the emotions and feelings that and behaviors you may have seen during lockdown. And I think back to school, your child may just whiz back to school and you wave you at the gate and be happy and, adapt straight back in, but they might not. And you may see some more of these behaviors, which can indicate that anxiety is there and they're trapped in their survival brain again and feeling unsafe and unsure. And I just wanted to reassure you that these are normal. So, rather than thinking my child's being really defiant, could we look at it and change perspective that, is this a frightened child in front of me rather than a defiant child? So we've already talked a lot about really if you're feeling concerned that your child is really worried about going back to school, these are my 5 top tips. I've written all this up in a blog as well, which is on my website, so you can see it there as well. So really talk to them about what they're looking forward to about going back to school. If they're being quite negative and worried about it, discuss fun memories they have of school before lockdown, if they have any, to remind them of what they did enjoy about school. And again, it might be tiny. It might be lunch. Lunches are really good at school. That's what one little boy said to me. The only good thing about lunches is about school is the lunch. Don't make any assumptions and don't dismiss any worries as trivial, because they may seem trivial and little in our eyes, but they're not in theirs. Research proves time and time again that dismissing worries or trying to minimize worries and saying it will be okay and you will be fine actually makes it worse. So normalize the worry that everyone could be feeling like this. You know, their friends may be feeling exactly the same. And help them acknowledge that it's okay to feel worried. It's okay to feel scared. That these feelings are normal and they will pass with time once they get more familiar with the situation. You could talk through the changes that they're going to see. So things like hand washing, sanitizer, you know, all those sort of the fact that they may be in a bubble, a learning bubble, all of those things. But I'm sure you'll have all got that information from school anyway. And reassure them that all those changes are to help them feel safe. So expect the tantrums. If that you may have a few, uncooperativeness, grumpiness. Again, I said it's all, I think, could be an indication of brain overload, I think, and tiredness. Much more sitting still, as I said, and it may result in energy needing to be released. So movement at the end of the day. Notice what I maybe use the crib sheets I gave you, and I'll give you in this PowerPoint about noticing sort of any particular signs. Re-establishing boundaries. So boundaries may have slipped a bit during lockdown. I know they have in this house. So it's quite important to get back into a good sleep routine, really, really important. 11 hours for primary school age generally, and 9 hours for teenagers. That's a tough one, isn't it? Yeah. Limit screen time if that's got a bit lax. 90 minutes before bed is the recommended downtime. But just to say that when I talk about screens, I'm not talking about TV. TV's fine. It's just gaming and, you know, iPads and things like that. You could create a new visual timetable for younger children so that they can actually see what their new routine's looking like. And again, really helpful for children who like steps and procedure, that they can see that visually. And I think really emphasizing with children who are wobbling, that there's that lovely quote that I've put up by Christopher Robin, that you're braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. I think that's such a lovely quote for now. But I think as much as we can prepare our children, I think it's really, really crucial to not let this new routine wobble you either, and not to rush back into it and feel really overwhelmed, because, you know, I'm very mindful that as parents our energy is quite low from what we've had to experience and put up with and sort out and juggle. And so just to be really aware that not to sacrifice your own needs, not to sacrifice your own self-care, and so that you're fully resourced to be able to deal with any behaviours that you know, are challenging. So that was sort of me sort of thinking about what your response is going to be, and I've just put up some questions here that could be really useful as a sort of reflective practice for the next few weeks. As I said, you'll get this from the slides. So I just really want to say, look after yourselves, as you know, and look after yourself so that you can be fully resourced. And a lot of these behaviors that we're seeing are completely normal. And I think it's going to take time for everyone to readjust to this new normal, and just be kind to yourself. And my biggest mantra is DDS: delete, delegate, and simplify. Try not to rush back into that really, really busy schedule that you had maybe you had before. Yeah, thank you for coming on to the talk, and I'm just going to sign off and say thank you for listening, and I'm here for questions if there are any more. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. That was brilliant. I'm going to track back through some of the comments. One of the last ones was somebody saying they majorly need to re-establish screen time boundaries. It's a difficult one.
It's really normal though, because you know, for sanity purposes, we've had to be more lenient on those sorts of things.
Absolutely. Oops, we just got some. Georgie Siggers has joined us. Dr. Georgie Siggers has been watching, and she said it's really helpful advice, especially about supporting children with ADHD. So thank you, Georgie. It's lovely that you've joined us tonight. Georgie does a massive amount of work with children who have ADHD and autism, and sometimes have dual diagnosis of both conditions. So we've had a comment about negative reinforcement is affecting a lot of young people who have ADHD, and parents have been having a lot of conversations with school about that. And I know another parent made a comment about how their child had been praised for their resilience and tenacity recently, and I think you touched on it, that as well as resilience, that tenacity to keep going at things is so important. Somebody has commented that since going to home-based learning, self-harm has stopped, and that a lot of the behaviours that were of concern before have ceased. So that has really helped, you know, a lot of children, I think we found.
And that report I mentioned, I mean, I know it's only a small cohort that they studied, but, you know, it's no surprise.
Somebody's asked, they'd be interested in learning more about how difficulties with executive function influences anxious behaviours, and how as a parent you can support executive functioning and to encourage a growth mindset in a child who struggles to attempt a task that they think they might fail at, and that virtual learning for this particular child has made this more difficult.
And part of that may be their learning style. So it's really helpful to find out their learning style, and a lot of children really struggle with visual and auditory learning.
Yes.
So their best way of learning is kinesthetic, which obviously the way lessons are being delivered online, there's no kinesthetic learning at all. So there will be that. So it's helping, I think, sometimes explaining to a child how their brain works, what their learning style is, can be very, very empowering, so that they don't feel that they're a failure. They understand that this is how my brain works. It's you know, everybody's brain is different, and mine excels at this. Mine excels at, you know, watching somebody dismantle something, and then I can put it back together.
Yeah.
You know, so it's
often the touching and feeling and the movement of doing things that some children.
Yeah, and online and homeschooling has been very difficult for kinesthetic learners.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really hard.
Yeah. People were saying they like the term bounce back.
Yeah, it's a good one. I think it's a good one to put on the fridge, actually.
And
I think you could make that quite playful, actually, by using balls, making it into a game. Actually, I think it's really nice to actually physically use that as a metaphor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Got some of those little toy things that you can stick to a table and you can push them and then they kind of bounce back as well. It's kind of a fun thing. So somebody had commented that a teenager had a difficult couple of years at school, but had achieved GCSEs and was looking forward to A levels, and that the school had emailed to mention their daughter's resilience and tenacity, which is what I touched on before. And it's lovely to hear of schools actually recognising and praising that, because I think often it's not appreciated how much extra effort children who have challenges have to put in to achieve the same as for another child. That it might be so much easier to do.
Which is why growth mindset builds children's self-esteem, because they're not being praised for what they've achieved.
Yes.
They're being praised for who they are.
Yeah. How is it best to respond to angry outbursts when a child feels slighted or self-conscious? This is for a 6-year-old. I empathise and validate the emotion and don't condone behaviour that is tricky. Will it improve with time and age?
It definitely will. It definitely will. But the consistency is the key. Applying that strategy time and time and time again. So using good old Dan Siegel, name it to tame it, all the time, consistently. Yes. It will get better. The thing is with anger is it often, particularly in boys, is driven by a perceived lack of competency, which then translates as shame or, frustration that I can't do this. Yeah. So it's just continually using positive reinforcement, praise all the time for when they,
when they do well.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know the incredible 5-point scale, Sarah, that we often recommend to parents. It's a way of helping a child use a shortcut language to how they're feeling, so that if they can feel they're getting angry, they can say they're a level 3 or a level 4, and you've worked out with the child different ways to calm down, different ways of supporting them when they get close to having an absolute meltdown or a really bad reaction to feeling angry.
And it's also asking them, what within anger, is it upset? Is it frustration? Is it disappointment? So building that emotional literacy. So, frustration is to do with an action, whereas upset is to do with the hurt. So, splitting it down so that it's not this whole anger, that anger has a message. What's that message that we should listen to?
And I loved what you said about externalizing. So what's anger telling you, or what's upset telling you?
Yeah.
I think that's really lovely. Somebody said the government have supported with bounce back loans for business. So they've coined the term as well.
Yeah.
Our son's primary school, going into year 3, suggested half days for the first 2 to 4 weeks. He has autism and ADHD. Do you think this could really be of a benefit to a child with struggles like this?
If the anxiety is high, then yes.
I would agree with you. I think to be successful with shorter days is going to be a really good thing, I think.
And he's still got the exposure, he's not got the avoidance, but it's the small steps and the small steps that he's coping with it, and he's, will lead to more self-confidence.
Absolutely. And there's less likely to be that overwhelm, which can be just so consuming. And send a child into the lower brain fight flight that you were talking about, Sarah, that then it's very difficult for them to be able to use their executive functioning and to be able to use language to understand why something maybe went wrong. And you want to avoid that if it's possible to do so.
And also, if there's sensorial triggers going on, back to a 7-hour day with huge sensorial triggers, is a big ask, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. I mean, a lot of, I'm sure everyone who's watching are aware of the increased sensory issues that a lot of children who have neuroatypical kind of developmental profiles show. So they may be very sensitive to sound or to visual stimulation or to touch or to movement. And this can build up through a day and be incredibly overwhelming. And sometimes it just, or the pressure cooker explodes at home, and sometimes it might happen at school, but you really want to try and support them as much as you can so that they have a lot of opportunities to have movement in the day or calming activities so the pressure doesn't build up, and to go back to school with a sort of small steps at a time plan. I think that's going to really support a lot of children, and it's really good, I think, if schools are able to support that as well.
And with for example, with PDA, often children with PDA are very good at masking at school, and then coming home, find it very, very overwhelming once they're at home.
Absolutely, that's so true. So somebody said everyone is different, but that approach helped my son, who has the same diagnosis. He was able to leave feeling success rather than be sent home after a meltdown. I think that's sort of probably around what we've just been discussing now. So we've got time for a few more questions if anybody would like to pose. Oh yes, we've got another one just dropped in. How can we get school to agree to part-time? School are dead set against any suggestion of a shorter timetable. This is for a child who has autism and PDA. That is, excuse me, I'm just going to have to plug in my laptop. I'll ask Sarah to answer that.
It's a tough one, isn't it? I think schools are very either sympathetic or unsympathetic. I just think creating the evidence, noticing what you've noticed in from your homeschooling, how you've noticed in which way they've thrived, in which way they haven't thrived. So sort of providing some documentary evidence of what you've noticed. I mean, without knowing your circumstances, it's a bit difficult, but I don't know what their educational policy is regarding neurodiversity, but I would have thought that providing evidence from professionals, so if they've got the diagnosis from you, Joe, using those recommendations and their own observations and just creating a case of, this is how we see him thrive, can be quite a powerful persuader.
Yeah, Yeah, it's really difficult. And I think it is really worth building evidence for a case, like you said, if you've got any professionals who can support what you're observing, and you can write down your observations in a letter for the school, and have a meeting with the school to really
have a meeting. It's counterintuitive, you know. It's so important for any child to get the most from their learning environment, and for a school to not embrace that, I struggle with.
Yeah. Somebody has asked, they joined late, but they said it's super helpful. A tough couple of days as they went back to school 2 days ago. Lots of rude, grumpy, disrespectful behaviour after school. For rude, disrespectful language, what do you recommend? Ignore it or address it at the time?
Address it at the time. Again, you know, using the name it to tame it. It's a strategy that you can use from 2 till you know, age 100. You can use it with adults, to be honest. You know, to say that, you know, I understand that, you know, this is difficult for you. You know, this is very different. You know, you may be feeling whatever you think they may be feeling, but it's not okay to talk to me like that, because in this family, we want to speak with kindness and respect to each other. But this ties in with the work I do with families, is to have that very key scaffolding around family values. You have a family plan around values of things that are important to you. So, for example, you wouldn't say you are being really rude because it's you, it's accusatory. You say, oh, in this family, that's not how we speak to each other. So again, you're almost externalizing it. You're using your family values plan as the scaffolding. So again, it's not accusing somebody of being rude. You are rude.
I have to
Does that
say,
make sense?
yeah, that's really good. I like Sarah, I'm a parent of 4 children, and after my first 2, I went on a parenting course, and I have to say it's one of the best things I ever did. It taught me a lot, which has stood me in good stead as a therapist as well as a parent. And I think we don't give enough consideration to really the job we do as parents, and how helpful it is to have some support with that and some structure to it. And I think that's something that makes the work that Sarah does so valuable and so important in helping children reach their potential, as well as be happy and healthy and resilient with great tenacity. So we've got another question to say, or another comment, that PDA was never much of an issue prior to lockdown. This is for a 12-year-old who is very musical and picks up things very quickly, was doing exceptionally well. But struggled through to the end of term. Demand avoidance was so much, stopped all his music lessons, and he wasn't able to deal with the demand to practice anymore. And then, sorry, posted too soon. It should have said he was doing so well at his music. But I think the main message is that the difficult behaviour came up after lockdown, the PDA type behaviour, and the demand avoidance that goes with that. Really. Then, Sarah, I don't know if you want to talk about on the Monday, the 5th of October, you're looking to do another live with us on the Circle of Security.
Yes. So I talked a lot about building an attuned relationship of secure attachment, and that is So all the research now is saying that attachment is the thing that helps any child feel safe and connected, and gives them the ability to thrive. So basically, I'd like to present a short presentation, workshop style, so quite interactive, about the circle of security, which is a lovely model that is about building secure attachment within your family with your children. But also, actually, you can transfer it into couples work as well, and it's applicable for all ages, primary and secondary. And it's not only about responding to your children's needs, it's about looking after your own needs as well, and seeing your strengths, what your strengths are that you can bring into your parenting, and considers what you need to resource yourself as well, and for you to feel confident and calm.
Yes, so important for us all to be calm.
So it's not really about strategies. It's more about applying this model bespokely within your family. It's just about what to look for, what to notice, how to respond, and it's just a lovely model that gives you a real protective factor for everyone's mental health.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that myself. So I don't know if anyone has a last question. We've got 4 more minutes before the end of today's session. We've had lots of thanks to you, Sarah, for tonight's talk from
that's okay.
Places, including the person in Australia who said she wished she worked with a team. Sarah's website is thewellaway.co.uk.
Yeah.
Somebody's just asking to find out more about Bounce Back. We will send out some, if you want to contact us at info@Starjumpz or Sarah's slides, please do that. And for information on the 5th of October, we'll also post information up on Facebook and various other platforms, so that you know about the talk and workshop on Monday, 5th of October. I don't know if you'd like to say anything to finish off, Sarah. Thank you so much for tonight. It's been lovely to be online again. We've done quite a few lives. We've got quite a lot of recorded lives on our Facebook page about supporting children with anxiety from different members of the Starjumpz team. So please do, if you've not seen them before, have a look on our Facebook page for those, because there may be some other things that can help you. But I'd just like to hand over to Sarah to say the last word and thank her very much for this evening. We've got more people saying big thank you. Really helpful talk before the uncertain times ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jo, for asking me to do it. I've really enjoyed it. And thanks everybody that's popped on. And all I just want to say as the last thing is, please, please, please be kind to yourself.
Hear to that. Good night, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Okay. Night-night.